Can you believe it? They actually called the police. On this channel, I've spent years diving deep into retro gaming history, exposing the stranger dramas that shape this industry, but more recently criticising how both national states and corporations are increasingly starting to behave like they belong in a dystopian novel. Somehow today's story manages to involve all of those things at once, because what started as a simple tale about a few old Nintendo development kits has now spiralled into something far more serious, something that preservationists are calling one of the darkest moments in modern gaming history. And the most unsettling part is not about what was taken, it's about how it was taken. Because yes, the British police are at it again, and this time it's not about hate speech or someone mouthing off on social media. This time they've allegedly turned up at someone's house, not just on behalf of Sega, but with Sega themselves reportedly present at a British citizen's raid. I am Lady Decade, and if you like your gaming content spicy, then hit that subscribe button, as we're about to talk about another crazy scandal that literally ticks every single box to make the gaming industry look like it's just fallen inside of a dystopian cyberpunk novel. While Sega are allegedly calling the police over discarded development kits, at least you don't have to hand over full price for your games. Right now, there are frankly ridiculous discounts awaiting through my links below. Black Myth Wukong is down 40%, Stellar Blade is down 29%, Expedition 33 has been slashed by a frankly absurd, in my opinion, 43%. Wu Chang Fallen Feathers is going cheap, and even Elden Ring Night Rain has dipped by 22%. So don't be a mug, pay full retail while corporations hoard the past and charge a fortune for the present. Fill up your basket, save a small fortune, and actually enjoy gaming again without the corporate price tag. Handcuffs are fun, but getting arrested actually isn't. But thanks to everybody who has commented recently, liked my videos, subscribed, and hit that rather extraordinary little hype button. Thanks to you lot, I've been able to spring out of that algorithmic jail that I've been in recently. So thank you so much. And if you could just carry on doing those things, and especially hitting that hype button, oh, love it. Thank you. And carry on with the video now, shall we? On the 8th of September 2025, Time Extension reported that officers from the City of London Police raided the home of an anonymous UK reseller back on the 14th of July, and according to the documents that the seller has shared, Sega Europe was allegedly named directly on the criminal search warrant used to authorise that raid. Not just present as an observer, not just assisting with technical advice, but allegedly listed as an executing party alongside the police themselves. In other words, according to the article, the documents appear to show that a private company was authorised to take part in the search and seizure of private property, wielding state powers as if they were a part of law enforcement. Which might sound extraordinary to you, because it is. And let me be clear from the outset, I'm not speculating, I'm being precise. Everything in this video is drawn from documents provided by the seller and published by Time Extension, along with corroborating information from preservationists who have reviewed the material. While nothing in this story has been tested in court and all parties involved deserve due process and the presumption of innocence, this is a topic at this moment that should be discussed more widely, especially given the fact that the Video Game Preservation Museum has specifically urged the community to talk about it, warning that the implications could end up being catastrophic if left unexamined. Of course, I'm not here to play judge or jury, but I am here to lay out what's been reported, what evidence has been shown, and why this incident has sent shockwaves through the preservation world. If what's being alleged is accurate, then this could be one of the most unsettling moments in modern gaming history, not because of what was seized, but because of how it was seized. This isn't just about a batch of old Nintendo development kits. It's about the possibility that the line between corporate power and state power might not be as solid as we've always been told in the UK. So, what's actually happened, or alleged to have happened. Going back to what was originally reported, City of London Police carried out an unannounced raid on the home of an anonymous UK game hardware reseller. According to the documentation the seller has since shared, around 10 officers arrived at dawn, forced entry under a full search warrant, and began systematically removing specific pieces of equipment from the property. The seller says he was arrested on suspicion of money laundering, handcuffed, and taken to Bishopsgate Police Station, where he was interviewed under caution. He was released later the same day under investigation, which means no charges have been filed, but the case remains open while the police decide whether to push it further. But what makes this all the more surreal is what they allegedly came for. According to the seller's own paperwork, the only items seized during the raid were several Nintendo development kits, not counterfeit goods, not stolen consumer stock, not anything resembling the usual contraband these operations target, just old Nintendo development kits. And these weren't bought off the back of a lorry. The seller maintains they had been purchased legitimately as part of an office clearance after Sega Europe vacated its Brentford headquarters earlier this year. For those who are unfamiliar with this side of the games industry, Nintendo development kits are supplied under strict license agreements and remain Nintendo's legal property and are usually returned or destroyed at the end of their life. Occasionally, though, they slip into the preservation scene through office clearances and whatnot, and this is how much of the surviving prototype hardware from the 1990s and 2000s ended up in museums and archives today. The Video Game Preservation Museum has called this a historic crisis for game history, warning it could set a dangerous precedent if left unchallenged. They've even launched a fundraiser to help cover the seller's legal costs. That's the point where this stops being a quirky little anecdote about some old dev kits and instead becomes a story with some serious implications for game preservation. Time Extension reported that the seized hardware at the centre of this case was never Sega's property at all. It was a cache of Nintendo development kits specialist hardware that had once been used inside Sega Europe to support third-party development work. That detail is crucial because development kits like these are not sold commercially. As mentioned, they remain the legal property of Nintendo, loaned under strict licensing agreements to approved studios. When they become obsolete, they are meant to be returned or destroyed. According to documentation provided by the seller, when Sega Europe vacated the long-standing Brentford offices, these Nintendo kits were left behind during the clearance process. They were allegedly not logged as active assets or segregated from scrap material, just swept up with everything else being removed from the building. From there, they took a surprisingly ordinary route. The seller's paperwork claims they were initially collected by a charity contracted to handle the clearance, then passed to a removals worker who treated them as surplus equipment and later sold them on privately as part of a mixed electronics lot. That's how the seller says he came to purchase the entire collection for around £10,000 as stock for his long-running refurb and resale business, which regularly buys redundant hardware from office liquidations and resells it to collectors, museums and archivists. This was not some shady black market transaction. In fact, on the surface it looks like a standard commercial clearance deal, the sort that has quietly rescued countless pieces of lost game history over the years. The impressive collection in question reportedly included Nintendo development kits for the Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, Nintendo DSi, Nintendo 3DS, Nintendo Wii and Nintendo Wii U. All stuff that I am sure most of us would absolutely bloody love to own, provided that you knew that the police weren't going to come banging on your door about it. Even more remarkable were the files and prototype builds left on those machines. Time Extension notes that the kits contained early or unreleased versions of Sonic Chronicles The Dark Brotherhood, Sonic Generations, Mario and Sonic at the Winter Olympic Games, Phantasy Star Zero, Alien Infestation, Shinobi, and even an unreleased Nintendo DS version of Rhythm Thief and The Emperor's Treasure. For anyone who cares about game history, finds like this are like gold dust. This is the kind of material that can potentially completely reshape how we understand the development of major titles, the sort of data that is usually lost forever when a console generation ends. Sega, however, clearly wanted all of this stuff back, but according to the seller's notes, Sega's attempts to recover the kits didn't begin with the raid. He says that around a month before it took place in mid-June 2025, a representative from Fusion 85, the private investigations firm later named on the warrant, contacted him posing as an interested buyer, allegedly trying to confirm the location of the collection. The seller claims he only realised their connection to Sega after the raid had taken place, and while Sega has not commented publicly on how this hardware slipped out of their control, it isn't hard to see why they might have been alarmed, because if Nintendo-owned development kits containing unreleased builds from multiple studios ended up in private hands, and Sega was the last company to have been responsible for them, then Sega could have found itself facing serious legal and reputational questions from Nintendo. Let's be fair though, Nintendo doesn't exactly have the best reputation when it comes to litigation. No matter what your opinion is on either Sega or Nintendo, the next part of the story is what set alarm bells ringing, not just for collectors, but for anyone who understands how British criminal law is supposed to work. Time Extension reported that the seller has provided what he says is the search warrant used during the raid, and what makes it so striking is what is printed on it. The documents appear to name Sega Europe and the same private investigations firm Fusion 85 that had earlier approached the seller proposing as a buyer as parties authorised to execute the search, not to attend as technical advisors, not to observe or anything, but to execute. That single detail has triggered a fierce debate among legal commentators and preservationists alike, because if accurate, it would be an unprecedented and potentially unlawful arrangement. And this isn't just speculation. Time Extension has since reported that the City of London Police have admitted in writing that the warrant explicitly allowed Sega Europe Limited and its private investigation contractor Fusion 85 Limited to enter a private home. That admission has only intensified the debate over whether the warrant itself was lawful. Here's why. Under Section 16 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, usually called PACE, only sworn constables can execute a search warrant. In practice, that means only police officers have the legal power to enter private premises, search them, seize property, or detain or arrest people found there. Sure, other people can be present during a search, a locksmith, a technician, or a translator, but they are only there as observers or technical specialists. They have no powers of entry, seizure, or arrest. They are, in the eyes of the law, guests, not enforcers. And that's what makes this paperwork so explosive, because if it had been read correctly, it doesn't list Sega and Fusion 85 as mere observers. It appears to list them as executing parties, as if they were legally authorised to carry out the search alongside the police themselves. That would, in effect, mean a private corporation in the UK is acting in its own commercial interest, has been granted state powers and the authority to forcibly enter a person's home and remove property from it. That's alarming as f***. The seller's legal notes even describe this as the privatisation of policing. They go further still, citing the landmark 1765 case of Entic versus Carrington. It's not something you would usually hear mentioned in the same breath as Nintendo development kits, but it's one of the cornerstones of British constitutional law. Entic established that government agents cannot enter private property or seize private possessions unless the law explicitly authorises them to do so. This was a foundational ruling that set the principle that the state itself is bound by the law, and that the home is protected from intrusion unless Parliament says otherwise. The seller argues that if Sega and Fusion 85 really were named on this warrant, that principle was bypassed. This means that if what took place is true, then it was not a normal police investigation, but something entirely new, a corporation effectively wielding the coercive power of the state to recover its own interests. His notes also cite Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which protects the right to respect for private life, family, and home. Article 8 does allow state interference, but only when it's lawful. proportionate, and includes safeguards against arbitrary use of power. The argument is that allowing a private company to participate directly in a criminal search undermines those safeguards because it blurs two roles that are supposed to remain completely separate: the neutral enforcement of powers of the state and the profit-driven motivations of a private entity. And adding to the confusion, the seller has stated that Suffolk Crown Court admitted it holds a copy of the warrant, but then asked him to confirm which version he had been given, raising questions over whether even the judiciary has clarity on what was actually authorised. Now, it's important to stress this legal theory has not been tested. As mentioned earlier, no court has ruled on the situation, and the City of London Police have not commented publicly on the broader controversy. And as for Sega Europe, they have not confirmed or denied that their name appeared on the document. So for now, this remains exactly what it is: a set of allegations raised by the seller and published in the media. But even with that caveat in place, the implications are impossible to ignore. Because if a corporation really was named as an executing party on a criminal warrant, then it would mark something Britain has simply never seen before in the world of game preservation. A moment where corporate power didn't just influence the law, but allegedly became part of it. For me, though, perhaps one of the most surreal things about this entire saga is the silence surrounding it. Sure, Time Extension have broke the story and a handful of small preservation-focused sites have echoed it, but beyond that, nothing. In my opinion, there is a reason for that, and it's nothing to do with conspiracy theories or anything, but more to do with how the industry actually works. Major gaming outlets survive on corporate goodwill. Early access review codes, preview event invites, sponsored content deals, and advertising campaigns. That is their oxygen supply, and when your business depends on access, you quickly learn not to bite the hand that feeds you. You don't have to be told to play nice, you just do. Publishing an article that even acknowledges that Sega Europe has allegedly been named on a police search warrant, let alone explaining what it might mean legally, is the kind of move that can quietly get your emails ignored. Not forever, but long enough to matter. And this isn't new. Whenever a major publisher becomes entangled in legal trouble, most of the access-based media simply look the other way. They don't deny the story, they just don't touch it. It's just the natural outcome of the system they've built, a system where your career depends on staying in the good books of the very corporations you're supposed to scrutinise. When you operate in that world long enough, you learn exactly where the invisible tripwires are, and you make sure never to go near them. And that's why you're barely hearing about this, because the people with the most access are always the people with the most to lose by using it. From the outside, it might be tempting to see all of this as a quirky collector drama, a niche dispute over a pile of old tech, but inside the preservation world, the reaction hasn't been curiosity, it's been fear, and it's important to remember what's at stake. These weren't retail consoles. They were Nintendo-owned development kits that had allegedly been discarded during Sega Europe's Brentford office move, sold off as surplus like they were scrap, and then suddenly recast as if they were stolen corporate assets. That is what's sent shockwaves through the preservation scene. Because if companies can discard historically valuable hardware and then allegedly call the police to claw it back long after it leaves their possession, it would turn preservation itself into a legal minefield. It would send a message to every collector, researcher and archivist: you can do everything by the book, buy hardware through legitimate clearances, catalogue it, archive it, even offer to share it with the public, and it still might end with your door being kicked in and the police carting off your life's work. The Video Game Preservation Museum has warned that this moment could reshape how lost media is handled forever. They fear that if this becomes the precedent, preservation will go underground. Collectors will stop sharing what they find, they'll stop reporting discoveries, they'll lock everything away in private obscurity, or worse, quietly destroy it rather than risk drawing attention. If that happens, the cost won't be measured in lawsuits or headlines, it will be measured in the history that vanishes silently and permanently because everyone became too afraid to save it. Gaming history is disappearing under what appears to be, well, fascism. It's a word that's been thrown around so carelessly online over the past decades that it's almost lost its meaning. These days it gets slapped onto anything people don't like, but in this case I am not using it as an insult, but instead as a description. Because in its textbook definition, fascism is the merging of state power and corporate power into a single apparatus. Two halves of the same machine, each propping up the other and acting as one. That was the core of the classic fascist model. It was about erasing the boundary between government and industry, building a system where private companies could wield the machinery of the state, and the state could serve the interests of private companies. And that is exactly why this story matters, because if the documents in this case are accurate, and a private corporation really was named as an executing party on a criminal search warrant, then that fits that definition. It would mean a company's commercial interests were directly fused with the coercive powers of the state, the authority to enter a private home, to detain someone and to seize their property. That's not supposed to happen in a democratic society. Those powers are meant to be separate. That separation is the safeguard, the thing that ensures the law is applied equally, not wielded on behalf of whoever happens to have the largest legal department or the strongest industry connections. Because the moment you allow that separation to blur, you're not just enforcing the law anymore, you are letting private power become the law. And if this can happen over something as obscure as a few old Nintendo development kits, then it proves something important. It proves it can happen again, and if it can happen again, it won't stop at dev kits. So what happens from here? Right now, this entire case sits in limbo. Time Extension has reported that the seller remains under active investigation by the City of London Police, with no charges filed, but the case has not been closed either. They were released under investigation after their arrest, but this means the police are deliberately keeping their options open while they decide whether to escalate it further. As for the seller himself, he has refused to sign paperwork disclaiming ownership of the seized Nintendo dev kits, forms that would have effectively handed them over to the authorities. Instead, they've stated their intention to fight for their return and have even discussed seeking a judicial review to challenge the legality of the search itself. Sega has reportedly not responded to multiple requests for comment, nor to 6 separate pre-action protocol letters sent by the seller's legal team. In other words, this story isn't over. There are no verdicts, no rulings, and no definitive answers, just unanswered questions and an investigation quietly ticking away in the background. And at this stage, whatever anyone might think of what's been alleged, everyone involved is entitled to exactly what the law is supposed to guarantee them: due process. As mentioned, the Video Game Preservation Museum has specifically asked people to talk about this, so I'm doing just that, simply to try and make sure the significance of this situation isn't buried in silence. If this really did happen, if a private corporation was named on a criminal search warrant and allowed to act alongside the police, then it would mean the very act of preserving history could become dangerous, not frowned upon, not discouraged, but actually criminalised. And if that becomes the precedent, the damage won't be measured in raids or lawsuits, it'll be measured in silence, because the prototypes, the dev kits, the unfinished experiments, all the raw, unfiltered work that shows how games were actually made will stop reaching the public at all. They'll be locked away in corporate vaults or quietly destroyed before anyone even knows they existed. And even more importantly, and I can't emphasise this point enough, the fact that this has happened once proves that it can happen again. And if it can happen again, it won't stop at dev kits, because at that point it stops being about game preservation at all and starts becoming a question of how much power corporations can wield over private citizens and how easily the state might let them do it. That is why this story matters. If this precedent takes hold, then we all have less freedom. Don't forget that right now there were frankly ridiculous discounts waiting through my links below. Black Myth Wukong is down 40%, Stellar Blade is down 29%, Expedition 33 has been slashed by 43%, Wu Chang Fallen Feathers is going cheap, and even Elden Ring Night Rain has dipped by 22%, so don't be a mug paying full retail price, while these corporations just hoard the past and charge a fortune for the present. Fill up your basket, save a small fortune, and actually enjoy gaming again without the corporate price tag. Or if you want to support what I do in a more personal way and access my behind the scenes cosplay library and more by becoming a backer on Patreon, and I'll see you all again very soon.